Listen, Paizo, all I'm saying is there might be another way. I realize not every deity in your setting is going to be as popular with your authors, and I realize that there may be some deities that are a lower priority for your authors, and that your authors will generally not want to pick those as a writing assignment. But you don't have to kill off that deity. If your other authors don't want to write for them, hire me. I'll gladly do it. Recently, Paizo has announced that they are going to be killing off one of the Core 20 deities in the Golarion setting for Pathfinder 2e, and today I'm going to be ranking those 20 deities based on how likely I think they are to be the one that falls on today's episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller who realizes that Paizo is going to need a new 20th core deity for their setting soon, and I would just like to pitch an unnecessarily long-winded tour guide as an option for them. I think it would be a perfect fit. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and welcome to an opinion video as I discuss which Pathfinder deity is going to die. At Gen Con, one of the announcements that was made is that in an upcoming story arc, one of the core 20 deities for Pathfinder 2nd Edition will die, and that it's going to be part of an adventure path. It's going to feature in their novels. This is going to be a major event in the Golarion setting, and as a result, a lot of speculation has been spinning about which of the core 20 deities is on the chopping block. So, in this video, I'm going to be doing a little bit of an off-the-cuff opinion piece about how I think each of the core 20 deities in the Pathfinder setting is going to fare in this upcoming event, and give you a ranking of how likely it is I think that a given deity may be the one that is actually killed off. Now, at the end of the day, this is strictly an opinion video. These are my thoughts and feelings, and I could be completely wrong. But I do have some criteria that I have used to rank the various deities that are part of the Core 20 and position them on this list. The first criteria that I've looked at is the core deity list for the Starfinder setting. We know that we're getting a Starfinder 2e, and while Paizo has specified that the lore of these two games are separate and do not necessarily influence each other, I still think that the general deity list for Starfinder can give us some insight into what the writers for Pathfinder might be thinking. So I've taken a look at the Starfinder list and tried to see what patterns that might give us. And then the other three things that I've looked at are what I call the target rating, drama rating, and replaceability rating of each of the core 20 deities. Target rating is basically a question of, is there anyone in the Pathfinder setting that is gunning for that deity? Do they have a target on their back? And as a further extension of that question, how serious of a vendetta do their enemies have? The more enemies and the more motivated of enemies that a particular deity has, the higher their target rating will be. The next factor that I consider is what I'm calling the drama rating, which is a question of, if this deity dies, how much drama does it add to the Golarion setting? My reasoning here is, if Paizo's going to take the time to kill off a core deity, they probably want this to be a very significant event in the setting, and they probably want the impact of the event to ripple throughout the setting for years to come. Therefore, the death of a deity that would have a relatively minor impact on the setting, I feel is less likely than the death of a deity who would represent a significant shift in the overall tone or setting of Golarion. Therefore, if I feel like a deity's death would be a dramatic change in the Golarion setting, their drama rating will be higher. The final consideration I have is what I call the replaceability rating, which is, I feel like Paizo is very likely to promote a new deity into the Core 20 going forward for the Golarion setting. If one deity is going to fall, that means another deity is likely to rise and take on that core deity mantle for themselves. Now, I do realize that a new deity stepping in does not have to step into exactly the same spot that a previous deity held. That is completely true. But I do think that if there is a particular character that is well positioned to step into a deity spot, that makes it easier for Paizo to write the old deity out and write the new character in. So those are the 4 criteria I'm looking at for this ranking video. However, even with those 4 criteria in mind, there is still a lot of personal opinion and conjecture, and I totally realize that there will be lots of people who disagree with my opinions. Therefore, I encourage everyone who is watching this video to jump down to the comment section and let me know your thoughts or your rankings. Where do you agree with my list? Where do you disagree with my list? And which deity or deities do you think is most likely to be the one that Paizo kills off? Of course, you should remember to do all of that other stuff that appeases our eternal overlord, the YouTube algorithm, by remembering to like, share, and subscribe. And you can also support this channel by checking out my free Discord and my Patreon. Links will be in the video description. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. Now, even though I am going to be ranking all of the deities individually in this video, I am also going to be kind of grouping the different core deities into 4 larger categories that represent some of my broad thoughts on this topic. And for the very bottom of my list, numbers 20 through 16, this is the category that I like to call the call an ambulance, but not for them selection of deities. At number 20, we have Torag. At number 19, we have Norgorber. At number 18, we have Rovagug. At number 17, we have Gorum. And at number 16, we have Calistria. Essentially, the big picture for all of these deities is the exact same. I think these deities are very, very likely to be involved in the story of a deity dying, and I even suspect that one of these 5 is going to be the deity that kills the other deity, but I don't think these 5 deities are actually in danger themselves. Let's go through each of them and talk about why. At the very bottom of the list, this one is a little bit meta, but I have Torag. Torag is the head of the dwarves, and his faith was featured very recently in the new setting book High Helm. And honestly, the fact that High Helm just came out is the main reason that I think Torag is not actually in any danger here. I feel like if Paizo was planning to kill off Torag, they would have held off on the High Helm book, and maybe even the Sky King's Tomb adventure path, until after the death of Torag, so that his death could influence those products. Now, with the release of High Helm, Torag is actually a fairly replaceable deity on my list. We've gotten a good look at the Dwarven Pantheon recently, and any of those could potentially step into his role. But at the end of the day, I really think that if Torag was going to die, they would want to show us the impact of that on Dwarven culture in a book like High Helm, so I honestly don't think Torag is in any danger. But that doesn't mean he doesn't represent a danger, because Torag is a very interesting example of a holy deity in the Golarion setting. Of the various deities that you would call good in the Golarion setting, Torag is easily the most extreme because one of his philosophies is a rejection of the idea of mercy for your enemies. Torag is a good and just individual, but if you come to blows with him, he's going to end you. And that makes me think that there is a very strong possibility that Paizo has been gearing up for a war between the dwarves and some other group in Golarion, and that Torag is going to be brought into conflict with another deity, and because that deity represents a threat to his people, I think there's a very real chance we're going to see Torag end someone because you don't mess with his people. And the really exciting thing about this possibility here is Torag doesn't have to get into a conflict with an evil deity for this to be true. Torag could be getting into a conflict with any deity that represents a potential threat to his people, and if he is not able to prevent the war, he is certainly going to end the war. In other words, if we have a divine conflict that's not good versus evil, but good versus theoretically other good powers, Torag is one of the most likely candidates to be in that fight and to end that fight. Number 19 is Norgorber, and he's the god of assassins. If you're putting together a list of who's going to land the killing blow on another deity, the god of assassins is a pretty natural pick. He's not in danger, but he's definitely putting other people in the line of fire. Now, this is very much a situation where Paizo could take the potential story arcs a lot of different directions, and you could see Norgorber being employed by another deity in their war against a third party, and Norgorber delivering the killing blow on behalf of another deity. I think you could get a lot of divine intrigue out of a storyline like that. But at the end of the day, Father Skinsaw is far more likely to land the killing blow than to be affected by a killing blow. Also, another point that causes me to put Norgorber so far down on this list is, honestly, Norgorber is a cover name. We don't know his true identity because he erased that identity when he ascended to being a deity. Meaning that, even if somebody kills him off, did they really kill him off, or did they get a different target by accident? Number 18 on my list is Rovagug, and honestly, Rovagug has a pretty high target rating, as there are a lot of deities that would be perfectly happy to end him. Sarenrae is definitely a prime example here. However, the thing to remember is, Rovagug escaping his prison and threatening Golarion once again is very much portrayed in the lore as an end-of-the-world type of scenario, and if I'm being honest, I don't think that Paizo is going to run an end-of-the-world scenario halfway through the second edition of Pathfinder. This doesn't feel like the right time for an event like that to happen, so if it's not time for Rovagug to be wrecking things, then ultimately I don't think he is going to be in danger. What could happen, though, is Rovagug could temporarily escape his prison, and if that happens, there are certainly a lot of deities that would step into battle to try to shove him back in that prison, and I could totally see Rovagug getting a kill on a deity as they are essentially making a heroic sacrifice to keep him contained just a little bit longer. The number one suspect here is, if Rovagug broke out for a brief period of time, he's totally eating Sarenrae. Everybody who knows Golarion lore knows that's how that's going to play out. So ultimately, I think Rovagug is not actually going to be the threat in this story, and even if he is the threat in the story, I don't think he dies. I think he eats Sarenrae instead, and then gets locked back in prison. Next up on my list, at number 17, is Gorum, and he is the god of war, who is prophesied to continue to exist until the last war is fought. And that, in summary, is exactly why I don't think Gorum is going to be the deity that's killed off by Paizo. It would be a pretty anticlimactic thing to say that there will be no more wars in your setting. Now that being said, Paizo has said that there will be a divine war taking place, and I certainly think that Gorum is mixed up and instigating a lot of the events causing this battle to happen. I certainly think that Gorum is trying to get opposing sides into this conflict. So I think Gorum is very likely to be involved. And beyond that, there's even a chance that if Gorum joins the fight, he could possibly land the killing blow. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Gorum's role in the Golarion setting is a pretty secure role, and I think that means Paizo is unlikely to kill him off, because it just wouldn't be a good fit for the setting. And then rounding out this particular category, at number 16, we have Calistria, and she's a little bit unique in this category. The previous 4 that I've mentioned, I have mentioned as possibly landing the killing blow. I see them as a major threat to other deities. Calistria is a little less so. She is a goddess of revenge. I see Calistria likely coming into whatever this story is after one of the deities has died, and in one fashion or another, driving the revenge against the killer of said deity. She is close with Cayden Cailean, so if he were the one to pass away, she could be on a personal quest for vengeance against someone who harmed someone that she was close to. Alternately, she could just totally be meddling in the fallout as a wide range of angry and vindictive individuals look to get revenge against whoever started this whole mess in the first place. I think Calistria is unlikely to feature in this story, at least initially, and as a result, I feel like she is probably safe, but I think she will join in this story after the big event happens, and I think you're going to see her driving people to the extremes of revenge as the world tries to cope with the fallout of whichever deity it is passing from existence. My next grouping of deities, number 15 down to number 11, is the definitely safe and probably not even involved group of deities from the Golarion setting. The overall picture for these is pretty simple. I don't see them as likely being heavily involved in whatever storyline that Paizo is getting ready to run. I don't feel like there are any conflicts that have really been built up for them, so unless they are just accidental collateral damage in 2 other deities' battle, I honestly don't see them even being part of the story, much less being in danger of being the deity killed off. At number 15, we have Irori. At number 14, we have Gozreh. At number 13, we have Desna. At number 12, we have Lamashtu. And at number 11, we have Abadar. And again, the broad summary of this group is, I just feel like they're probably not going to be involved. A good picture of this is number 15, Irori. He is the god of history and self-perfection. He's off studying books and meditating somewhere. He's probably not even in the fight. Take a general lack of active enemies and a real lack of dramatic story potential coming from his death, and Irori is just one of those that you look at and think, he's probably not even going to be mentioned in the story. Number 14, Gozreh, is very similar. There are not a lot of active threats against Gozreh. There are not a lot of individuals who would be gunning for her position and power, and there aren't any real storylines that have been built up around Gozreh and what might happen were Gozreh taken from the setting. So ultimately, I don't feel like Gozreh is in much danger. Now, I will say that Besmara, who is the deity of pirates, is one of the core 20 deities, and Besmara is the kind of character that could perceivably step into Gozreh's role in the Pathfinder setting. So I'm not going to rule out some kind of crazy storyline where Besmara goes pirate and tries to steal Gozreh's powers. That is a possibility, but ultimately Gozreh and Besmara are pictured as allies in the setting, so this scenario seems pretty far-fetched to me, and lacking any other real threats to Gozreh's power, I think Gozreh is perfectly safe. In at number 13, we have a deity that I'm pretty sure is going to survive entirely on the basis of Paizo does not want their fanbase to riot, and that is Desna. I haven't seen any official polling on which deities are the most popular for the Pathfinder fanbase, but going off just casual observation, Desna is extremely popular. Just seriously, it would be a very unpopular move. Desna is popular in Pathfinder, she's popular in Starfinder, and her role as a deity of dreams and travel kind of sets her outside of any of the larger conflicts that I could see Paizo trying to push. So at the end of the day, she just doesn't seem like a very likely candidate to be in the line of fire. She's probably not involved in the fight, and if she were accidental collateral damage in a battle between 2 other deities, I genuinely feel like the fanbase would riot. So I think at the end of the day, Paizo's not going to touch her, because it would just be an unpopular move. At number 12, we have Lamashtu, who is the mother of monsters, and mostly the reason I feel like Lamashtu is safe is because it just feels like there haven't been any storylines pushing her recently, and that ultimately leads me to believe that she's probably not even being considered in the larger context of the story that Paizo is hoping to tell. Are there plenty of deities who would be motivated to kill the mother of monsters? Sure. But at the very least, I'm not aware of anyone who's gunning for her, and I feel like the lack of obvious, dedicated antagonists will ultimately leave her safe. Now, I will say, Lamashtu's relationship to goblins in the setting could be a reason for Paizo to want to work her out of the setting. With the launch of Pathfinder 2e, goblins have become a playable ancestry, and goblins also kind of serve as a mascot for Paizo. So if Paizo is looking at shaking up the lore of goblins, they could be considering a storyline that pushes Lamashtu out of the picture, possibly even kills Lamashtu. I see that as a distant possibility, so I'm not ruling it out entirely. If Lamashtu were taken out, it would represent an opportunity for Paizo to really broaden what the core 20 deities could represent. One of the possibilities I was kicking around as I was thinking about this at Gen Con was Paizo could introduce a new deity of dragons to help explain some of the new dragon types that are going to be appearing in the Pathfinder remaster. That's a possibility, and if Lamashtu were to exit, that's an easy option that you could insert in her place. So I feel like there's some possibility Lamashtu could be in danger, but at the end of the day, I feel like I'm stretching too much on those ideas, so I think she is probably safe. Finally, rounding out this category is Abadar. And Abadar is a little bit different in this category in that he's probably going to be involved in whatever fight is happening. As the deity of society at large, he is going to be very invested in the outcome of whatever this war is, regardless of who wins. And if he's invested in the fight, that can potentially put him in the line of fire. I don't think Abadar is necessarily anyone's target, but he could be collateral damage. If Paizo really wants to shake up their setting, Abadar could be in danger. But ultimately, I feel like Abadar's role in whatever this story is going to be is mostly going to be supportive, secondary to what the other players are doing, and Abadar is the kind of deity who is cautious and careful, so the kind of scenario where he gets caught in the line of fire, at least to me, seems very far-fetched. So while I think Abadar is going to be more active than the other deities in this group, ultimately I still feel like he's far enough removed from whatever's about to happen that I don't think he's in any real danger. For my next grouping, these represent deities that I think are in some genuine danger. If you have a war between the gods, if you have this massive conflict that Paizo is presenting, these are the deities that I think are likely to be involved, and even if they're not the primary movers and shakers, I definitely can see them as easy collateral damage. I can see them getting involved, getting caught in the crossfire, picking the wrong side, if you will, and ultimately paying the ultimate price. However, at the end of the day, they don't strike me as the most likely candidates to be the deity that Paizo kills off for one reason or another. I think they're at risk, but overall I think they're going to pull through. At number 10, I have Pharasma. At number 9, Cayden Cailean. At number 8, Sarenrae. At number 7, Nethys. And then at number 6, Iomedae. Pharasma is kind of in the same category for me as Rovagug. We know, according to Pathfinder lore, that Pharasma is ultimately fated to be destroyed at some point. She is going to die. We know that. However, her death is supposed to be near the very end of the universe. She will, at some point, essentially pick out her successor who will start the next universe once this one is gone, and then she will be caught up in the destruction of all that she has overseen since this particular universe began. Pharasma is fated to go down. The thing is, I don't think she's fated to go down just quite yet. Kind of like Rovagug, the death of Pharasma literally would need to coincide with the end of the world, with the apocalypse. Everything is going down, and she's going down too. Honestly, if Pharasma goes down, more than one deity is going down in the story. That's the real point here. Do I think there will come a day where Paizo will do an end-of-the-world scenario and use that as a way to reset the Pathfinder setting? Sure, I think that very much could happen at some point. But, like, maybe at the switch over from Pathfinder 4th edition to 5th edition, something like that. The reality is, I just don't see Pharasma going at this point, because the kinds of stories that would see her destroyed just don't feel like they should be happening yet in the Golarion setting. Now, that being said, Paizo has teased that their timeline has moved forward, and there are different hints that have been dropped throughout their lore that tease the idea that the end of days is getting closer. We've been told that Grotus is moving closer to Pharasma's realm. We've been told that some of the changing alliances among aeons could be reflective of the fact that the universe is nearing its end. There are some clues that have been laid out that the end of the world might be getting closer, but closer is a relative thing. If Paizo chooses to do an end-of-the-world scenario, Pharasma could very much be in danger, and I'm not going to lie, it would make for a very interesting story if Pharasma was replaced by Grotus. That could have some interesting implications for the setting, just saying. Still, at the end of the day, I don't think Paizo's ready to run that story yet, so ultimately I think Pharasma is probably safe. At number 9 we have Cayden Cailean, and mostly I put him in this category because he is an adventurer. He very much strikes me as the kind of deity who is going to get involved at some point, and his personality as the accidental god really strikes me as the kind of character that could get in over his head, and as a result, get killed. If such a story were to play out, I don't think Cayden would be the main target. It would probably be a story where there is another target that is being chased after, and Cayden steps in to save the day, and maybe even rescues another deity, but ultimately falls in the battle. I think that is a very plausible scenario for him. But I think it's also worth mentioning that Cayden is right up there with Desna in terms of the general popularity that I think he has with the fan base, meaning that killing off Cayden would be a risky writing move for Paizo to try to pull. I think they could do it a little easier for Cayden than for Desna, but ultimately he strikes me as a character that I think Paizo would prefer to keep around. A couple of nuances to his place on this list, though. Number 1, Cayden is one of the hardest deities to actually replace. As the accidental god, as the man who took the test of the Starstone on a dare, no one is waiting to step into his shoes. And that leaves a very obvious hole in the Core 20 list of deities. Now, I have noted earlier that a new deity stepping in doesn't need to neatly fit the role of the previous deity. You can have wildly different options, but the fact that Cayden doesn't have a natural replacement does lend to the idea I don't think he's the one in danger here. However, Cayden also represents an opportunity to talk about a group of villains that we don't hear much about, known as the Veiled Masters. Now, I don't want to dive into all of this lore, but the existence of the Starstone Tower is, in many ways, a direct affront to the villains known as the Veiled Masters. As a result, anyone who has achieved divine power through the test of the Starstone is, in effect, an affront to those villains, and the idea of a mortal human just walking in and accidentally becoming a god through the test of the Starstone, the Veiled Masters would loathe that to their very core, and if we were to see the Veiled Masters introduced into the story as major villains or major players, suddenly Cayden's situation gets a lot more precarious because I think he would be a major target for them. In at number 8, we have Sarenrae, and Sarenrae is in many ways a perfect picture of what this category is, where you have deities that I think are very likely to get involved in a divine war. Sarenrae's personality would totally drive her to be a part of whatever's going on. As a result, she is naturally at risk at being in the crossfire of whatever's going on, but as I mentioned earlier on this list, if Sarenrae is actually killed off, I think every Pathfinder fan knows who's going to do it: Rovagug. Which means, ultimately, I think Sarenrae is only in danger if, for one reason or another, Rovagug comes into play. So, if you have a story where Rovagug gets out of his prison for a brief period of time, suddenly Sarenrae is in a lot of danger, but if it's any other villain to the story, ultimately I think Sarenrae is probably safe. My wild card in this category at number 7 is Nethys, the god of magic, and mostly the reason he is so far up on this list is because he is very much the wild card of this entire list. Nethys is a god of madness. His perception of the whole realm of what magic is and can be has caused a terrible strain on his mind, and predicting Nethys' behavior is difficult to do. Even adherents and worshippers of Nethys will acknowledge that in one moment he might be very restorative, and in the immediate next moment might be quite destructive. His behavior can be quite erratic, and as a result, extremely difficult to predict. Now, as a god of magic, do you think he's going to be mixed up in a war between the deities? Yes, obviously. Magic's going to be flying left and right, he's going to see what's going on, he's going to know what's happening, and at the end of the day, we don't know how he's going to react. That madness wild card of who Nethys is really makes his role in the story a big question mark. Is he going to insert himself into the battle for some unknown reason, and as a result be struck down? I haven't seen a lot of story beats from Paizo that would lead in that direction, but Nethys' role in the setting really wouldn't need a lot of build-up for something like that to be plausible. And on the particular subject of a drama rating that I mentioned earlier, the death of the god of magic would seriously shake up the Golarion setting. And as a side note, there is a remaster going on where some of the rules around magic are changing, so there could be justification for a shakeup. At the end of the day, I don't think this is the direction Paizo's going, but Nethys is just enough of a wild card that he makes it to number 7 on this list. Finally, rounding out this particular category of certainly at risk, we have Iomedae. Iomedae is a crusader deity, and if there is a fight between good and evil, her and her church, they are on the front line. There is little doubt in my mind that she is a major player in whatever story Paizo is about to do. And as a major player and combatant in said story, she is almost certainly at risk. Mostly the reason that she didn't break the top 5 for me is that she just doesn't have the replaceability that some of the other deities on this list have. It's easy to see a scenario where Iomedae could be killed, but it's difficult to figure out who might step in if she were to pass away. Sure, there are plenty of angels and imperial lords all across the Golarion settings, so in a vague sense there are options for who could step into her spot, but it doesn't feel like anyone has really been built up to occupy her spot, and without a solid "this is who would take her place," I feel like she is probably not ultimately the deity who's going to be killed. That being said, there is one possibility I've seen tossed around with Iomedae kind of at the core of the story, that this would be a spicy story. Paizo would be going big if they did this, and I'm not going to rule it out. I think there's a chance. What if Eredin comes back? Iomedae inherited Eredin's place in the Pantheon. If Eredin were to return in some fashion, he could very naturally come into conflict with Iomedae, as he might very much feel that her place belongs to him, and I could see Eredin coming back and killing Iomedae in order to regain his spot. I don't know if Paizo's willing to pull the trigger on that story. That's a big one. The setting-shaking drama of the return of Eredin is almost too big to try to properly comprehend, but at the end of the day, if Eredin were to return, I could very easily see Iomedae falling as a result, and I think that that storyline would flow very naturally. So that particular spicy possibility does bring Iomedae in at number 6 on this list. But now we come to my top 5, and among the core deities of the Golarion setting, these are definitely the deities who I think they are probably in danger. With any of these deities, I can very easily see a storyline that makes them a target. I very easily can see a storyline where they are replaced by another individual who occupies their spot in the celestial hierarchy of Golarion. All of these deities strike me as very likely targets for the storyline that Paizo is going to be doing. And honestly, at the end of the day, I really think it's going to be one of these 5 that ultimately does fall. At number 5, I have Urgathoa. At number 4, I have Erastil. At number 3, I have Zon-Kuthon. At number 2, I have Shelyn. And at number 1, I have Asmodeus. Let's break down my thoughts on all of these. Number 5, Urgathoa. Urgathoa is very much a deity that has a lot of enemies. I didn't break down the exact numbers, but if you look at the allies and enemies section of deity entries, Urgathoa is frequently listed as an enemy for a lot of different deities. There are a lot of individuals who would naturally be gunning for Urgathoa, and with some of the recent events involving the undead in the Paizo setting, poor last fall, Urgathoa's power base right now is pretty strong. There are a lot of people who already didn't like her, and there are a lot of people who are probably very motivated to go after her in the current Golarion setting, and if you're going for a war between holy and unholy, Urgathoa is one of the easiest characters to drop into that story, meaning she is very much in the line of fire. Which is why it may surprise you to hear, I don't think a good deity is the one who will kill her. If Urgathoa dies, I think the Whispering Tyrant's going to betray her and steal her power. We already know that Tar-Baphon has attempted to become a deity a couple of times previously in Golarion lore. He aspires to that level of power, and in what I understand from talking to some other Golarion lore experts, apparently Tar-Baphon's relationship with Urgathoa got really strained in the crossover from 1E to 2E. So while they are technically allies, there has been some build-up that the Whispering Tyrant may not be the most loyal ally to Urgathoa, and with everything the Tyrant has done recently in the story, it would not surprise me if he just straight up stages a coup against Urgathoa, kills her, and takes her power. It's completely in keeping with this character. The storyline would be incredibly dramatic, and it would be a natural continuation of what we've already been seeing happen in the Golarion setting. Ultimately, I think there are other deities that are at more of a risk than Urgathoa, but I cannot overstate how much danger I think Urgathoa is in right now in the Golarion setting, and I do think if she goes down, it will be at the hands of the Whispering Tyrant. Now, before I get into number 4, I just want to apologize really quick because I'm probably going to be a little more opinionated on this point than I normally am with this channel. Normally, I do not like to criticize Paizo and their writers, but to explain my reasoning here, I am going to be dipping into an area where I am frequently frustrated with some of Paizo's writing. Ultimately, Erastil comes in at number 4 on my list because Erastil is frequently the deity that I feel has the worst writing in the entire Golarion campaign setting. It feels like a lot of the writers who write for Erastil are frustrated that they got the assignment, like they don't understand the character or they don't want the character. I have seen a lot of poor writing around Erastil and the faith of Erastil in the Golarion setting, to the point that it kind of frustrates me because of the various deities in the Golarion setting, Erastil is actually the one I connect with the most. Paizo has some absolutely fantastic setting writers, and a lot of the different churches, religions, deities in the Golarion setting are modeled around some of the general religious practices that you might see here on Earth. They take inspiration from cultures around the world and then infuse them with some fantastical elements and insert them into the game. It's one of the cool things about Paizo's writers that I really respect. That being said, while it's really clear the inspiration for Erastil and his church, it's also pretty clear that none of the writers like writing Erastil and his church. And I'm from rural Kentucky, which means that Erastil and his church in Golarion is kind of the closest analog to the primary religious influence I had growing up. So it kind of frustrates me to see Erastil's church so often poorly written. Honestly, I feel like Erastil is on the chopping block because nobody wants to write for him. He kind of seems like a character that Paizo has been looking for ways to push off to the side for a while now anyways. And if I look at Erastil analytically, there is a problem that his church represents inside of a fantasy RPG that the other deities don't necessarily have, and that is the anti-adventurer bias. Again, this could be a huge tangent, so I'm not going to chase it too far. If you saw my video ranking all of the ancestries, you may remember one of the reasons I specifically don't like the Kashrishi is they are written in such a way that they won't go on adventures. They don't like going on adventures. They don't want to go on adventures. And if you have a Kashrishi who is an adventurer, you're playing so hard against type for the Kashrishi that you're almost not playing a Kashrishi. Erastil, as presented in Golarion lore, doesn't really have adventurers. He wants you to stay home and take care of your family and take care of your community, and the idea of going out into the wider world and adventuring is really against the grain in Erastil's faith. It is problematic inside of a game to have a deity who would be mad at your character for literally playing the game. So what I think Paizo might be doing, and honestly if they do this I would be a fan of it happening because I think it would lead to some better writing and some better stories, they might create a scenario where Erastil sacrifices himself in the defense of his family or in the defense of some of his communities. An easy option would be the forces of Urgathoa are threatening something he cares about, but you put Erastil in a situation where he has to defend his loved ones and then he dies in the process, and then Erastil has several family members, a son, a daughter, a wife. Any of those could step into his role and become sort of an Avenger-style deity that could honestly lead to some really cool storylines. And that would pretty easily solve the problem I mentioned a moment ago. If Erastil is killed defending his family, and his son, his daughter, his wife has to step into that position, you could very easily see how they would encourage adventurers as a way of protecting the community, and that might be a better fit to what Paizo's trying to do overall. Now, one last thing I want to say on Erastil, because I know I've been pretty opinionated here, but just to add a little bit more weight to my argument that Erastil is at risk, Paizo, I've noticed that your writers have a really bad habit of not giving characters happy endings and killing off at least one member of every married couple in your setting. Seriously, look at Tsukio if you don't believe me. Mauricio, run! The authors are coming for you! But alright, let's move on to numbers 3 and numbers 2 on this list, because honestly, these two deities need to be talked about together. Zon-Kuthon and Shelyn. Right now, Shelyn is probably the most popular opinion on the internet of who Paizo's going to kill, and part of the reason is, in the teasers for Starfinder 2nd Edition, there have been references to the new Amalgate deity, Zon-Shelyn. And so there are a lot of people who are looking at that reference from Starfinder 2e and saying, okay, Zon-Kuthon and Shelyn are about to merge into a single deity. Therefore, it's very probable that one's going to kill the other, and that somehow leads to a situation where their powers merge into a single entity. And honestly, I would not blame anyone who supports this theory. I think there is a lot of credibility here. We know that Shelyn has been driving to restore her brother for a very long time, and there has been a lot of narrative tension in her quest to redeem her brother for a while. So a conflict between Zon-Kuthon and Shelyn feels quite inevitable in the setting. The storyline, the drama potential here is very high, and Starfinder 2e has essentially told us that Zon-Shelyn is your replacement deity regardless of which of these two were to pass away. So there are certainly a lot of factors here that put Zon-Kuthon and Shelyn directly in Paizo's line of fire, and I completely understand why a lot of people are pitching this theory. It makes a ton of sense. That being said, and I have no evidence for this. I'm just being completely honest here. I have no evidence for this. It feels like a red herring to me. First off, the devs for Starfinder and Pathfinder have said that the lore of the two are separate. They do not influence each other. That is an established statement that has come out on several occasions. Also, Zon-Shelyn is in Starfinder. The clash between Zon-Kuthon and Shelyn very much could be on the plate, and the arisal of this amalgate deity Zon-Shelyn, I think that is definitely going to happen, but I think Paizo is pitching Zon-Shelyn as a red herring. I think that is a Starfinder story point, and I think there is a different Pathfinder deity that is in the actual line of fire for whatever story arc Paizo's getting ready to do. Don't get me wrong, I think Zon-Shelyn's happening. My point here is, I think it's a red herring, and I think Paizo's got something else up their sleeves for what they're going to be doing in Pathfinder, and I think that Paizo dropped the hint of Zon-Shelyn the same day as, oh, a deity's going to die, as a way of distracting the fan base so that they could pull a twist on us later. Again, I could be completely wrong. I totally understand where people are coming from on this one, but for me, I smell a red herring. I think Paizo's trying to trick us here. That being said, between Zon-Kuthon and Shelyn, if one of those two is ultimately the deity that is going to die, I think Shelyn is the more likely candidate because her focus on redemption makes me believe she is unlikely to actually strike the killing blow. So if we're going to have a dramatic battle between the two, I think at the end of the day, Zon-Kuthon would be the victor. However, we still have number one on my list, and the deity that I think is the most likely candidate to be the deity that is killed as a result of this story arc, Asmodeus. Now, first, let's talk about the meta reason that Asmodeus' name has gotten thrown around a few places on the internet, and that is the move from the Open Gaming License to the ORC. Yes, Paizo has been switching up their lore and their setting and elements of their game, and there are a lot of people who suspect that Asmodeus is going away specifically because Paizo would want to remove him just as an extra way to protect themselves legally, in line with some of the other ORC moves that they've been making. That is very much a valid argument, and if that is your theory, I totally understand where you're coming from. But let me throw just a little bit of water on that theory. Paizo typically plans their work about 2 to 3 years in advance, meaning that the normal timeline for a story arc involving the death of the deity would have been, at least in its initial stages, well before the Open Gaming License controversy occurred. I'm not saying it's impossible that Paizo rushed a storyline as a way of removing Asmodeus from their setting, but with all of the other products that Paizo has been rushing this year, it strikes me as highly unlikely that they would also be trying to rush a storyline as major as Let's Kill a God. I'm not 100% opposed to the idea, but I just want to say it doesn't fit their normal production schedule, and that's something we need to keep in mind. But now let's go back to the fun speculation here, because you may have noticed in the argument I just made, that doesn't mean Asmodeus wasn't already on the chopping block. Even if Paizo has been working on the Death of a Deity storyline for over 2 years, it is completely legitimate that Paizo could have already put Asmodeus on the chopping block, and it just conveniently lines up with some of these larger OGL ORC items that have been playing out in the gaming community. Let's think about this. Number one, Asmodeus has targets on his back. Pretty much every good deity wants to take him down. Pretty much every evil deity wants to take him down. Seriously, there's an entire line of archdevils who are more than happy to stab Asmodeus in the back and claim his throne. The problem that Urgathoa has with just Tar-Baphon, Asmodeus has with basically every deity in the Golarion setting. I think Irori would leave him alone, but that's about it, honestly. There is an environment full of targets who would naturally be coming for Asmodeus, and in terms of the replaceability of Asmodeus, any of the archdevils in the setting could easily say, "Hey, that's a nice throne. I'll sit there." It would not be hard at all to step someone into that role and very naturally fill the spot he has previously taken. However, there is one particular thing about Asmodeus that really makes me think he could be in the line of fire. Asmodeus possesses the key to Rovagug's prison. Think about the implications of that. If Asmodeus dies, the key to Rovagug's prison is in play. The most dangerous celestial artifact in the entire Golarion setting is suddenly easily unaccounted for. If you're trying to create a dramatic plot arc that could easily span for a few years, the death of Asmodeus and the loss of that key could offer so many potential plot hooks. It kind of boggles my mind, all of the implications of if Asmodeus were to fall. I think some crazy stuff could be happening. So honestly, at the end of the day, Asmodeus has a lot of people gunning for him. He's easy to replace with another archdevil. And the loss of the key to Rovagug's prison could be a huge driving factor in stories going forward. Combine that with the fact that with the release of the ORC, Asmodeus might be a character that Paizo wants to retire anyways, and suddenly I think the smart money is on Asmodeus as the deity that Paizo's going to kill. I think his death would represent a lot of fun story potential, and would be a pure win from Paizo's perspective, so that's the reason he comes in at number 1 on this list. But those are my thoughts. The time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. Which deities do you think are in danger, and who do you think Paizo is the most likely to kill off in this upcoming story arc that they have planned? Let me know if you agree with my analysis. Let me know if there are deities that you think should be farther down on the list or higher up on the list. Let me know if you think I've missed something very obvious that Paizo could be using to lead into this story. Essentially, I'm looking forward to your comments. I want to hear your theories. Don't forget all of the other YouTube stuff. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Check out my free Discord and my Patreon, links in the video description. But, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.